You probably think you know HOAs. Petty tyrants obsessed with the precise shade of beige your mailbox is painted, or the unacceptable height of your lawn, measured to the millimeter by some clipboard-wielding retiree with too much damn time on his hands. I thought I knew them too. Then Mr. Alistair Henderson, president of the Harmony Meadows Estates Homeowners Association, a man whose face seemed permanently frozen in a rictus of smug disapproval, decided my ancestral ranch was his personal infrastructure project. He didn't ask. He didn't negotiate. He simply sent a crew, under the cloak of a long holiday weekend, to carve a trench across 300 acres of my prime grazing land, laying a fat, black, glistening pipeline to siphon water from the Crystal Creek headwaters directly to his precious, thirsty cul-de-sacs. They didn't know I was coming back early from inspecting my northern pastures. They didn't know the rustle they heard wasn't the wind, but me, watching from the ridgeline, the setting sun glinting off the cold steel of my rifle's scope, though my fight wouldn't be with bullets. Not yet. The violation was a raw physical shock, like a fist to the gut. This wasn't just land, this was legacy, bought with sweat and sacrifice by my grandfather, nurtured by my father, and held in trust by me for my daughter, Lily. Henderson had, with casual arrogance, desecrated it. My first call to Harmony Meadows was met with a symphony of bureaucratic indifference, culminating in Henderson himself. His voice, oozing condescension through the phone line, informed me it was a minor temporary easement for essential community services. He actually chuckled. Progress, my dear. You can't stand in the way of progress. Besides, it barely impacts your... What is it you do out there? Cows? The "my dear" was a calculated insult, a pat on the head to the little woman playing rancher. The cows comment, a dismissal of a way of life that predated his plastic paradise by a century. That was when the cold burn started, deep in my chest. Not hot rage, not yet. This was something colder, more patient. This was the quiet click of a safety being disengaged. They had, with the surgical precision of a butcher filleting a prime cut, severed my piece. They just didn't realize they'd handed me the scalpel to return the favor. They didn't know I wasn't just some local hick easily rolled. They didn't know the years I'd spent not just running this ranch, but defending its water rights, its boundaries, its very existence, against a creeping tide of progress that Henderson so blithely championed. They didn't know my dormant authority was a deep well of legal knowledge and an even deeper reservoir of resolve. Henderson, in his delusional pursuit of absolute control over his beige kingdom, had made a fatal miscalculation. He assumed I was a sheep. He was about to discover the wolf he'd prodded from its den. My initial survey of the damage was a grim inventory. 57 mature oaks felled, a natural spring choked with debris, and the scar of the pipeline itself, a dark wound across the earth. The ground, hallowed by my family's history, now bore the ugly signature of Henderson's avarice. This wasn't just trespass. This was a declaration of war. And Mr. Henderson, in his infinite suburban wisdom, had just armed his enemy. The line wasn't just crossed, it was obliterated. The ranch is more than soil and grass, it's a testament. My grandfather, a man carved from granite and grit, saw potential where others saw wilderness. He fought droughts, blizzards, and bankers to hold this piece of earth. My father, quieter but no less fierce, taught me the language of the land, the subtle shifts in the wind, the wisdom in the ancient oaks Henderson's goons had so carelessly butchered, the sacredness of water in this arid country. Lily, my daughter, her eyes wide with a child's innocent horror as she traced the pipeline's ugly gash with her small finger, was the future of that legacy. Her silent question, "Why, Mama?" echoed louder than any shouted threat from Henderson. It was for her, for them, that the reluctant warrior within me stirred. This wasn't about vengeance. Not entirely. It was about justice, cold and clear as the Crystal Creek water they sought to steal. My first step was not to storm the Harmony Meadows clubhouse, though the image held a certain visceral appeal. No, this required a different kind of warfare. The kind fought with documents, deeds, and the unassailable logic of the law. I called Sarah McMillan. Sharp, Young, with a mind like a steel trap and a specialty in water rights and land disputes that had made her a quiet legend in certain circles. She listened, her expression growing progressively grimmer as I detailed Henderson's brazen act. "They filed no easement, no eminent domain claim, nothing?" she asked, her voice a low hum of disbelief. "Just Doug?" "Just Doug," I confirmed. Henderson called it progress. A ghost of a smile, cold and thin, touched her lips. "Progress has a price, and it seems Mr. Henderson expects you to foot the bill." "We'll disabuse him of that notion." Our initial strategy session was less a legal consultation and more a war council. We spread out the county plat maps, title deeds dating back to the original land grant, geological surveys. My ranch, a sprawling expanse of green and gold, and adjacent to it, the tight geometric cluster of Harmony Meadows, looking like a rash on the landscape. The pipeline, a stark black line, bisected my property with brutal clarity. Sarah, with forensic precision, began to assemble the arsenal. Drone footage documented the extent of the damage, the fresh earthworks, the felled trees. Affidavits from my ranch hands, who'd witnessed the construction crew's hasty retreat. A meticulous catalog of every violation, every statute broken. Henderson's minor temporary easement was rapidly becoming a mountain of legal liabilities. He thought he was dealing with a pushover. He was about to learn that this particular rancher came with a very well-prepared, legally lethal sidekick. The air in Sarah's office was thick with the scent of old paper and fresh coffee, the quiet hum of her computer a counterpoint to the storm brewing. "They're drawing from the Crystal Creek Aquifer," she said, tapping a hydrological map. "Specifically from a series of artesian wells located on the old Miller property just upstream from you." The Miller property, a name that rang a distant bell. Old Man Miller had passed years ago, his land falling into the hands of an out-of-state holding company. An idea, audacious and beautiful in its simplicity, began to form, a tactical masterstroke. Sarah's research confirmed it. The Miller property held the primary water rights for the entire Crystal Creek Basin that fed Harmony Meadows. The HOA, in their infinite wisdom, had secured a long-term lease for access, but they didn't own the source. They'd built their beige paradise on borrowed water, assuming the tap would flow forever. "The holding company," Sarah mused, scrolling through financial records. "They're looking to divest non-core assets. They've had it on the market quietly for months. Overpriced, no local takers." A slow smile spread across my face, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes but speaks of cold, calculated intent. "What if," I began, the plan crystallizing, "what if the source was no longer available to them?" Sarah's eyes widened, then narrowed in thought. "Buy it? You want to buy the Miller property? The water rights alone are expensive, I know." I cut in. "But consider it an investment in Henderson's education. Some lessons are best learned the hard way. And this one," I tapped the map where the pipeline sliced through my land, "this one demands a memorable curriculum." The tactical operation, codenamed Dry Gulch in my private thoughts, commenced with a level of secrecy that would have made a covert operative proud. Sarah, through a series of carefully constructed shell corporations and third-party negotiators, began the delicate dance of acquisition. Every communication was encrypted, every meeting discreet. Henderson, blissfully unaware, continued his reign of petty terror within Harmony Meadows, issuing citations for unapproved garden gnomes and aggressively policing recycling bin placement. A tin-pot dictator presiding over his domain of astroturf and architectural monotony. He sent me another letter, this one on thick, embossed HOA letterhead, formally demanding I cease any interference with their vital community utility and threatening further action if I didn't grant them a retroactive easement for a nominal fee. The sheer, unadulterated gall was breathtaking. I had the letter framed. It would make an excellent exhibit. My inner monologue was a steady rhythm of tactical considerations. Step 1. Document their transgression with irrefutable evidence. Done. Step 2. Identify their critical vulnerability. Done. The water source. Step 3. Secure leverage. This was the acquisition phase. It took weeks, a nerve-wracking ballet of offers, counteroffers, and due diligence. The Miller property wasn't just land. It was a complex portfolio of senior water rights, a geological treasure. The irony was exquisite. Henderson's illegal pipeline, intended to secure his community's future, was about to become the instrument of its thirst. While he was busy measuring lawn heights, I was buying the wellspring of his power. The final papers were signed on a Tuesday, a day as bland and unremarkable as Harmony Meadows itself. The deed to the Miller property, and more importantly, the paramount rights to the Crystal Creek aquifer, were now mine. A quiet satisfaction settled over me, as deep and cool as the water now under my control. The trap was set, the bait, Henderson's own arrogance. The transition from landowner to water baron was seamless, marked only by a series of legal filings Sarah executed with surgical precision. Notices were dispatched to the County Water Board, the State Environmental Agency, and, most deliciously, to the Harmony Meadows Homeowners Association, informing them of the change in ownership of the Crystal Creek headwaters and the termination of their existing water access lease, effective in 72 hours. I pictured Henderson's face as he read it, the smugness curdling into disbelief, then panic. The 72-hour window was a courtesy, a small nod to the innocent residents who were about to become collateral damage in Henderson's war of ego. My quarrel was with him, and the system that enabled his tyranny, not with the families who just wanted a functioning tap. But Henderson had made them his shield. The day, as I'd come to think of it, arrived on a crisp autumn morning. At precisely 9:00 a.m., under the watchful gaze of a certified water management technician I'd hired, the main valves controlling the flow from the Crystal Creek wells to the Harmony Meadows pipeline were slowly, deliberately, closed. There was no dramatic explosion, no geyser of water, just the quiet, inexorable cessation of flow, a metallic sigh from the pipes, and then silence. Back at my ranch, the phone began to ring within the hour. The first calls were from confused Harmony Meadows residents. "Our water pressure is low. Is something wrong with the mains?" I advised them, politely but firmly, to contact their HOA president. Then came the call I was waiting for. Henderson's voice, usually so smooth and controlled, was a strangled yelp. "What in God's name do you think you're doing? You can't just turn off our water. This is an outrage. This is illegal." "Is it, Mr. Henderson?" I replied, my voice calm, almost serene. "More illegal than, say, trenching an unauthorized pipeline across private property? I'm simply exercising my rights as the new owner of the Crystal Creek water source. Your lease, as you were notified, has been terminated. It seems Harmony Meadows has a hydration problem." The sputtering on the other end of the line was immensely satisfying. You bought the Miller property? This is a trick. A vendetta." "Call it whatever you like, Mr. Henderson. The fact remains, your taps are dry, and they will remain so until certain outstanding issues are resolved." I let that hang in the air. Silence stretched, thick with his dawning horror. What issues?" he finally stammered. "Well," I said, savoring the moment, "there's the matter of the illegal pipeline, of course, its immediate removal, full restoration of my land to its original condition. And then there's the punitive fine for trespass, environmental damage, and willful negligence. Let's call it around $500,000. Consider it a fee for the rather expensive education you're currently receiving in property law and basic human decency." I could almost hear his jaw hitting the floor. The silence this time was a masterpiece of apoplectic shock. "500,000? He wheezed. "You're insane." "Perhaps," I conceded, "but I have water." "You, Mr. Henderson, do not. I suggest you convene your board. You have 24 hours to respond to my terms. After that, the price of water, like the price of arrogance, tends to go up." I hung up, the click of the receiver echoing with the finality of a vault door slamming shut. The air in my study felt cleaner, lighter. The first shot in this war had been fired, not with a gun, but with a deed and a wrench, and it had hit its target with devastating precision. The ensuing days were a blur of panicked HOA meetings, frantic calls from lawyers whose bravado couldn't mask their clients' desperation, and a rising tide of discontent from the increasingly parched residents of Harmony Meadows. Henderson, true to form, tried bluster first. He threatened lawsuits, injunctions, even criminal charges for reckless endangerment. Sarah met each volley with cool, irrefutable legal precedent. My ownership of the water rights was absolute. Their pipeline was an illegal encroachment. His threats were empty. The local news, initially treating it as a bizarre neighborhood dispute, began to sense a bigger story. Water wars in suburbia, one headline blared. Another featured a picture of Henderson, looking harried and furious, juxtaposed with a serene shot of my ranch, the Crystal Creek flowing peacefully in the background, pointedly not towards Harmony Meadows. The visual metaphor was potent. His manufactured oasis was dying of thirst while the natural source, now under my stewardship, thrived. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a rusty shovel, much like the ones his crew had used on my land. My family, Lily in particular, became my anchor. Her quiet pride in me was a far greater reward than Henderson's sputtering fury. "You showed him, Mama," she said, her small hand in mine as we surveyed the damaged section of the ranch, now marked with bright orange stakes indicating the pipeline's illegal path. "Not yet, sweet girl," I told her. "But we're getting there." The $500 fine was, of course, symbolic, a number plucked from the air to underscore the magnitude of their transgression. But the demand for the pipeline's removal and land restoration was non-negotiable. Henderson, after a week of dry taps and mounting rebellion from his constituents, finally caved on that front. A beleaguered-sounding lawyer, not Henderson himself, called Sarah to discuss terms for temporary water reinstatement, pending a resolution. Temporary reinstatement, Sarah relayed to me, a hint of amusement in her voice, will occur when hell freezes over or when a certified check for the full cost of pipeline removal and land remediation, as estimated by our independent assessors, is delivered to my office. Along with a legally binding agreement to cease all further trespass and to enter into good faith negotiations regarding damages, the sum for removal and initial remediation was a hefty $150. It was, as they say, a bitter pill for Henderson to swallow, but the alternative was a full-blown resident revolt and the complete collapse of Harmony Meadows' property values. They paid. Grudgingly, with much gnashing of teeth, but they paid. Water, a trickle at first, then a steady flow, returned to Harmony Meadows. But it was my water, leased to them on a temporary day-to-day basis, at a premium rate. Every drop a reminder of their dependency, their folly. This, however, was just phase one. The fine, the broader damages, the public reckoning, that was for the courts. Sarah filed our lawsuit. Trespass, conversion, private nuisance, tortious interference with property, and a request for punitive damages that made the initial $500,000 fine look like pocket change. The summons was served to Henderson personally during an emergency HOA meeting where he was attempting to explain why their water bill had suddenly quadrupled. The process server, a man with a flair for the dramatic, announced it loudly enough for the entire room to hear. The deadpan sarcasm of the universe was sometimes a beautiful thing. The legal machinery ground slowly, but with relentless momentum. Depositions were scheduled. Henderson, under oath, was a study in narcissistic rage and selective amnesia. He couldn't recall authorizing the pipeline specifically, yet insisted it was a board-approved community enhancement. He claimed the initial survey maps, which clearly showed my property lines, were ambiguous. He even tried to suggest my grandfather, dead for 30 years, had given some vague verbal permission for future utility access. Sarah, with the precision of a surgeon dissecting a tumor, dismantled his assertions one by one. Her questions were scalpels, each one drawing a fresh bead of sweat from Henderson's brow. "Mr. Henderson," she'd ask, her voice deceptively mild, "can you point to the minutes of the board meeting where this community enhancement was approved and the route across my client's land specifically sanctioned?" Cue shuffling of papers, mumbled excuses. "Mr. Henderson, Are you aware that the surveyor who signed off on your ambiguous map had his license suspended 2 years prior for falsifying documents in 3 other HOA disputes? His face paled. It turned out Henderson's progress was built on a foundation of forged permits, backdated approvals, and a cozy relationship with a thoroughly corrupt local planning official who had since, conveniently, retired to a non-extradition country. The local corruption ties exposed through documents were a thing of ugly beauty. Each exhibit Sarah presented, the unrecorded easement agreements that were clearly fakes, the emails from Henderson pressuring the disgraced surveyor, the inflated invoices for the pipeline construction, was another nail in the HOA's coffin. My own deposition was a contrast. I stated the facts, cold and hard. The value of the lost timber, the cost of soil remediation, the diminished value of my grazing land, the disruption to my ranching operations. But beneath the factual recitation was the intensely personal narrative of a legacy violated, a trust broken. I spoke of my grandfather's hands, calloused from building this ranch, and my daughter's future which Henderson had so carelessly endangered. The emotional undercurrent was palpable, a cold-blooded calm that barely masked the righteous fury beneath. The supporting neighbors, initially a silent majority cowed by Henderson's HOA, began to stir. Several came forward with their own stories of Henderson's overreach, his bullying tactics, his misuse of HOA funds. They became unexpected allies, their testimonies painting a picture of a man drunk on petty power, whose delusional belief in his own authority had led him to commit a monumental act of theft. My sidekick, Sarah, was magnificent. She was the tech-savvy strategist, uncovering digital trails of malfeasance, and the eccentric ally, her deep knowledge of arcane water law proving to be the HOA's undoing. She transformed my raw anger into a focused legal weapon. The initial phase of the public reckoning was satisfying, watching Henderson squirm under the weight of his own lies. The fight was far from over, but the tide had turned. The water I controlled was not just H2O. It was leverage, it was justice, and it was slowly, inexorably drowning Henderson and his sham empire. The courtroom buzzed with a low hum, a mixture of anticipation and local gossip. Harmony Meadows residents packed one side, their faces a mixture of anger, anxiety, and a dawning realization that their esteemed president was, to put it mildly, a colossal fool who had gambled with their homes and lost. My side was quieter, anchored by Sarah, my ranch hands, and a few supportive old-timers who understood the sanctity of land and water. Judge Eleanor Vance, a woman known for her sharp intellect and intolerance for nonsense, presided. Her gaze, when it fell on Henderson, was arctic. The trial itself was a masterclass in tactical deconstruction. Sarah, in her opening statement, laid out the case with chilling clarity. This is not a story of a simple mistake, Your Honor. This is a story of calculated theft, of arrogance, of a homeowners association that believed it was above the law, and of a president who treated his neighbor's ancestral land as his personal construction site. Henderson's lawyer, a slick, overpriced import from the city, tried to paint the HOA as a victim of circumstance, a well-meaning organization simply trying to provide for its residents. He argued the pipeline was a public good. Sarah eviscerated that argument. A public good, Your Honor, that required trespassing, forgery, and the destruction of private property? A public good that enriched Mr. Henderson's chosen contractors and illegally siphoned resources? The only good here was for Mr. Henderson's chosen contractors. Henderson's ego and his cronies' pockets. Expert witnesses testified. A hydrologist detailed how the HOA's pipeline, had it continued unchecked, would have eventually depleted the aquifer, impacting not just my ranch but other downstream users. A timber appraiser calculated the value of the mature oaks destroyed, a sum that made several HOA members gasp. A soil scientist explained the long-term ecological damage and the extensive, costly remediation required. Then came my testimony. I spoke not of anger, but of heritage. Of the fiduciary duty I felt to the land, to my family's past, and to Lily's future. I recounted Henderson's dismissive attitude, his "my dear," and his sneering reference to my cows. I presented the framed letter, his arrogant demand for a retroactive easement. They crossed a line, I concluded, my voice even but carrying the weight of absolute conviction. A line drawn not just on a map, but in decency, in respect for the law, and in the fundamental right to enjoy one's property without it being plundered. The dramatic lighting changes in the courtroom seemed to underscore each emotional beat. Sunlight streaming through the tall windows as truth emerged, shadows falling as Henderson's lies were exposed. The on-screen text, in my mind's eye, was the progression of legal filings, the damning emails, the fraudulent permits displayed on the courtroom monitors for all to see. But the true drama was Henderson's cross-examination. Sarah approached him not with aggression, but with a kind of weary patience, as if explaining a complex concept to a particularly slow child. She walked him through his own contradictory statements, his convenient memory lapses, the damning paper trail that led directly to his office. "Mr. Henderson," she said, holding up a copy of the forged easement, "this document bears a signature purporting to be your former board secretary, Ms. Albright." Ms. Albright, in her sworn deposition, stated she was on a cruise in the Bahamas on the date this document was allegedly signed in your presence. Can you explain that discrepancy? Henderson blustered. He stammered. He looked to his lawyer, who could only offer a helpless shrug. He tried to invoke executive privilege for an HOA, a claim Judge Vance dismissed with a withering glare. The meticulously constructed facade of the powerful HOA president crumbled, revealing the petty, narcissistic, and ultimately incompetent man beneath. It was a public reckoning, played out in slow, excruciating detail. The visual metaphor of a fence, representing boundary and defiance, had been shattered by Henderson. Now, the courtroom itself was the new fence, hemming him in with the undeniable truth. The climax wasn't a dramatic outburst, but a quiet, devastating implosion. Henderson, cornered by Sarah's relentless, surgically precise questioning, finally uttered the words that sealed his fate. "All right, perhaps some administrative shortcuts were taken. For the good of the community, they needed water." The admission, wrung from him after days of prevarication, hung in the air. "Administrative shortcuts," Sarah repeated, her voice dripping with deadpan sarcasm. "Is that what you call forgery, Mr. Henderson? Trespass? Willful destruction of property?" Judge Vance had heard enough. Her patience, already worn thin, snapped. The closing arguments were almost a formality. Henderson's lawyer offered a weak plea for leniency, citing the HOA's supposed service to the community. Sarah, in contrast, delivered a powerful monologue, a rhetorical flourish that punctuated the justice about to be served. She spoke of the abuse of power, the betrayal of trust, and the fundamental principle that no one, not even an HOA president with an exaggerated sense of entitlement, is above the law. "They didn't just build a pipeline," she concluded, her gaze fixed on Henderson. "They attempted to build a monument to their own arrogance on my client's land. Today, that monument falls." The wait for the verdict was surprisingly short. Judge Vance returned to the bench, her expression stern. The courtroom held its breath. She began by excoriating Henderson and the Harmony Meadows HOA board. "Your actions," she stated, her voice cold as glacial meltwater, "were not merely negligent. They were reckless, arrogant, and demonstrably illegal. You displayed a shocking disregard for Miss Harris's property rights and a contempt for the legal process that this court finds appalling." She then addressed me. "Mr. Harris, you have shown remarkable fortitude and a commendable respect for the rule of law in seeking redress through this court, despite the egregious provocation you endured." Then came the hammer blows. Full liability for the HOA. An order for the immediate, supervised removal of every inch of the illegal pipeline. Full costs for the complete ecological restoration of my damaged land, based on my experts' highest estimates, legal fees, every last cent, and then punitive damages. She didn't award the $500,000 I'd initially floated as a fine. She awarded $2 million. A collective gasp went through the Harmony Meadows side of the courtroom. Henderson visibly sagged, his face ashen. It was a public embarrassment of epic proportions. The visual metaphor here was the dry taps in Harmony Meadows, suddenly juxtaposed with the flood of consequences drowning their HOA. The news headlines the next day were brutal. HOA hit with multi-million-dollar judgment in pipeline fiasco. Harmony Meadows president humiliated in court. The arrest warrant in my mind was for Henderson's reputation. It was DOA. The tactical ops metaphor had played out. My legal strategy, a well-planned campaign, had achieved total victory. The surprise reversal wasn't that I was planning all along, but the sheer totality of their defeat, far exceeding what even I had dared to hope for when I first saw that black wound on my land. The locked gate of their arrogance had been breached and shattered. The aftermath was swift and decisive. The Harmony Meadows HOA, facing financial ruin and a full-blown insurrection from its members, declared bankruptcy within weeks. Henderson was unceremoniously ousted, his reign of terror over. A court-appointed administrator took over, tasked with liquidating assets to pay the judgment. My first priority was the land. A specialized crew, working under my direct supervision and that of an environmental consultant, began the painstaking process of removing the pipeline. Each section pulled from the earth felt like a small victory, a cleansing. The trench was refilled, the soil carefully remediated, native grasses and saplings planted. It would take years, generations even, for the scars to fully heal, for the oaks to grow tall again, but the process of restoration had begun. The monetary award, when it finally came through after the HOA's assets were disentangled, was substantial. But it was never about the money. It was about the principle. It was about drawing a line in the sand, or in my case, the soil of my ranch, and defending it. I used a portion of the funds to establish a legal defense fund for small landowners facing similar battles against overreaching developers or powerful entities, a way to pay forward the justice I had received. The water from Crystal Creek continued to flow, but now under a new equitable agreement with the chastened, reorganized Harmony Meadows community. They paid a fair price for a managed resource, their days of entitled theft over. The porch light of my ranch house, which had seemed dimmer during the fight, now burned brighter, a beacon of resilience and return to control. My daughter, Lily, watched the final section of pipeline being hauled away. She didn't cheer, but there was a quiet satisfaction in her eyes. "You fixed it, Mama," she said. "We fixed it," I corrected gently. "And we made sure it won't happen again." The symbolic revenge tied to family legacy was complete. The blood, metaphorical in this instance, but representing the deep wound to my heritage, had been answered not with more violence, but with a cold, calculated, and ultimately triumphant application of the law. The experience changed me. The reluctant warrior was no longer reluctant. The dormant authority was now fully awake, a watchful guardian of this land. The intense personal cost, the stress, the sleepless nights, the emotional toll, had been significant, but the victory was a balm. There was a somber resilience in knowing I had faced down tyranny, however petty its suburban guise, and prevailed. The final visual metaphor, the newly installed reinforced fence line along the boundary with what was once Henderson's fiefdom. Not just a physical barrier, but a psychological one. A locked gate against future incursions. A testament to the fact that here, the rule of law and the fierce protective loyalty of a landowner for her heritage meant something. "You won't believe what happened next," they sometimes say. But this, you can believe. Because when they cross a line etched not just in dirt, but in dignity, the reckoning will be as relentless and precise as the turning of the earth itself. And sometimes, the person they dismissed as just someone with cows holds all the aces and all the water.